I'm Robert. I'm 55, and if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that predictability is key. I don't live a flashy life. In fact, I prefer it quiet. My work keeps me busy, and that's about it. I don't need the chaos of constant socializing or empty chatter. Most days, I focus on my business, make sure everything's running smoothly, and leave the rest behind. I've always kept my personal life simple. After my wife passed away 5 years ago, I thought I'd never find joy in things like family gatherings again, but I show up when I have to, mostly because of Emily, my daughter. She's 28 now, living abroad, and I can't help but feel a little proud of her. Still, her living far away means I spend most of my time alone. Not that I mind much. The silence, the routine, it's familiar. Emily is different from me. She has this energy, this spark that always seemed to radiate from her. When she was younger, she was curious about everything, about the world outside of our small town. She's smart, driven, and I think that's why she moved abroad. She wanted to see what else was out there, what more life had to offer. And I couldn't blame her for that. She deserved to experience the world. But sometimes I wonder, did I push her too hard when she was younger? Was my steady, predictable way of living something that might have held her back from becoming the person she is today? But Emily's life is her own. And mine, well, it's been about keeping things stable. I've worked hard for what I've built. My business, my home, my finances, they're all secure. I never flaunted my wealth, though. I've never needed to. It's always been enough for me to know I have it. I know some people would envy my position, but I've always found comfort in the quiet, in knowing what tomorrow will look like. No surprises. I like it that way. Then there's my brother, Peter. He's the complete opposite of me. If there's a mess, he's in the middle of it. He's impulsive, never thinks before acting, and has always lived with his head in the clouds. And trouble seems to follow him wherever he goes. We've never seen eye to eye. He's never understood my need for stability, and I've never understood his need for chaos. But despite all of that, he's still my brother. We share blood, and that means something, even if he's always been more of a burden than a brother to me. Peter's son, Alex, is the one I've always had a harder time understanding. Alex is 24 now, and on the surface he's charming. He can win people over with his smile and his easy confidence. But there's something about him that never sat right with me. He's distant in a way that I can't quite put into words. He'd always seek out the other relatives, avoid me. Maybe I was just too old-fashioned for him, too predictable. He had big dreams, aspirations that didn't fit with my way of doing things. But there was something more, a sense that he was always thinking ahead, always planning something. And I couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for the right moment to make his move. I hadn't seen much of Alex lately. We weren't exactly close, and with Emily living overseas, I didn't have a lot of reason to keep up with the family. But then one evening, Peter invited me to a gathering at his house. It wasn't unusual. Family parties happened every now and then, and I always showed up out of obligation. I didn't look forward to them, but I'd do it for Emily, and because, well, it was family. That night, things took a turn I wasn't expecting. The party was loud, as usual. People chatting, laughing, drinks being passed around. But I didn't feel like part of it. I stood in the corner, sipping my drink, observing. Peter was talking to a few of the guests, laughing about some mess he'd gotten himself into again. I don't know why I didn't just leave, but I stayed. It wasn't long before I overheard raised voices from the other room. It was Peter and Alex. At first, I didn't think much of it. Family arguments weren't exactly rare. But then I caught a phrase that made me freeze. I'll make sure he leaves it to me, not Emily. It's the only way to fix everything. I wasn't sure if I heard it right. I didn't understand what Alex meant by it. Fix what? What was going on between them? And why was he so focused on Emily? It was like a cold chill ran down my spine. I couldn't make sense of it. I quietly made my way closer, trying to listen in without being noticed. The conversation was muffled, but I could tell it wasn't just a casual disagreement. There was something more behind it, something I wasn't supposed to know. But I had heard enough. I stood there for a moment, processing what I'd overheard. Alex, wanting something from me? From my estate? And why Emily? Was he planning something I didn't understand? I felt unsettled, confused. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just a family spat. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Something was going on beneath the surface, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to find out what it was, but I couldn't ignore it. Not now. Something about that phrase, fix everything, kept echoing in my mind. I didn't know it then, but that night would be the beginning of a series of events that would change everything for me, my family, my future, and my relationship with Alex. I had no idea how far things would go, or how deeply the cracks in our family ran. But I was about to find out. It's been a few days since that night at Peter's house, and I can't seem to shake the feeling that something's wrong. At first, I tried to push it out of my mind. I figured it was just a moment of tension, a family argument blown out of proportion. But the words Alex said keep playing over and over in my head. I'll make sure he leaves it to me, not Emily. It's the only way to fix everything. Why would Alex say that? What could possibly need fixing? And why was he so focused on Emily not inheriting anything? I've been through a lot in my life, but I've never heard anything like that from him before. Alex was always the charming, distant one. He wasn't like Peter, always getting into trouble, but he also never seemed like the type to get involved in anything serious. Still, there was something in his tone that night, a coldness that unsettled me. And now, I can't stop thinking about it. The more I thought about it, the more the puzzle pieces started to form in my mind. I knew Alex was ambitious. He always had big ideas and dreams that didn't quite fit with the rest of us. But this was different. It felt like something deeper, something more personal. I had to figure out if I was just imagining things or if Alex was truly trying to manipulate me. Family gatherings aren't exactly my idea of a good time, but I still show up for Emily. I try to stay out of the way, not wanting to get involved in the noise. But these days, when I attend, I can't help but watch Alex a little more closely. He's been avoiding me, which is odd. We used to talk now and then, even if it was just small talk. But now, he barely looks in my direction. When he does, it's only a polite nod or a quick, "How've you been?" There's nothing more to it. He's distant, but not in the usual way. It's like he's deliberately keeping his distance, and I don't know why. I started paying more attention, trying to figure out if my suspicions were just paranoia or something more. At the last family dinner, I noticed Alex kept steering the conversation toward topics I didn't expect. He started asking about my long-term plans and what I thought about family legacy. At first, it seemed innocent enough, he was just making small talk, right? But the way he phrased his questions made me uneasy. It was as if he was fishing for something. Every time I gave a short answer, he'd try to press a little further, asking things like, "Have you thought about passing down your business? Or what about your estate? Who do you think should carry it on?" It wasn't the kind of question you ask someone who's just trying to make conversation. It was as if he was trying to gauge where my head was, to see how I was thinking about the future. I remember thinking, what is he really asking here? But I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe I was reading too much into it. After all, we've had family dinners like this before, and I've never really thought twice about it. But then there were other things. At the last family event, Alex had found a way to corner me in the hallway. "You've been doing well, huh?" he asked, casually leaning against the doorframe. "Everything going according to plan?" I didn't like where this was heading, but I answered anyway. "I'm fine, thanks. Just keeping busy with the business." He nodded, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "You've always had a good head for business. That's why I'm curious. Are you thinking of changing anything? You've worked hard for it. I'm sure it's going to be a big part of the family's future, huh?" It was subtle, but there was something in his voice that set off alarm bells. He was asking about my future plans, but he was doing it in a way that made me feel like he wasn't just interested in the business for the sake of family history. It felt like he was trying to plant a seed, trying to figure out if I had intentions of passing things down, and if so, who might benefit from it. I kept my response short. "I haven't really thought about it much yet. Too busy, you know?" But Alex didn't seem to let it go. He just smiled and nodded, like he understood, but the whole conversation left me feeling uneasy. I kept wondering if this was all a coincidence, or if there was something more going on beneath the surface. I started to look for more signs. The next time I saw Alex at another family gathering, he didn't talk to me much. But he spent a lot of time with the others, laughing, joking around. He was his usual charming self with everyone else. But when it came to me, it was just the same distant politeness. Nothing more, nothing less. It felt like a game he was playing, and I wasn't sure if I was part of it or just an observer. I had to admit it, I was starting to feel suspicious. Was Alex really trying to manipulate me? Was he positioning himself to get what he wanted? I couldn't be sure, but I was starting to think that maybe I wasn't just imagining things. I kept to myself more, observing, taking note of his behavior. He'd slip in little comments here and there. At one point, I heard him talking to Peter, asking how things were going with the business. It was a casual conversation, but Alex's eyes were always darting over to me, as if he was waiting for something, waiting to see if I would say something, anything, that might give away my plans. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to think that Alex, the nephew I had known for years, could be playing some kind of game with me. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like I had to face the truth. He was trying to get something. What it was, I wasn't sure yet, but something was off. I knew one thing for sure, though. I wasn't going to let myself be manipulated. Not by him and not by anyone. But what if I was wrong? What if I was just being paranoid? I didn't know. All I knew was that I had to be careful. Something was brewing, and I had to figure out what it was before it was too late. For the next few days, I tried to shake off the feeling that something was wrong. I tried to tell myself that maybe I was just imagining things, that it was nothing more than a miscommunication. But every time I thought about that conversation I overheard between Alex and Peter, the more I couldn't shake it. The words kept echoing in my mind, "I'll make sure he leaves it to me, not Emily. It's the only way to fix everything." Why did Alex feel so certain that Emily shouldn't inherit anything? Why was he trying to fix something? And why was he focused on me? These thoughts lingered in the back of my mind, and despite my best efforts to ignore them, they kept coming back. I couldn't help it. Every time I saw Alex, I began paying more attention to him. Something about the way he acted made me feel like there was more going on than met the eye. He was avoiding me, keeping his distance. When we spoke, it was always just surface-level politeness, never anything more. But as I watched him, I couldn't help but notice a pattern in his behavior. Whenever we were at family gatherings, Alex would subtly try to corner me. He would find a way to be alone with me for a moment, and that's when he would drop these casual comments, things like, "So Robert, what do you think about estate planning these days?" Or, "It must be hard to think about the future when you've worked so hard for what you've got." At first, I thought maybe he was just making small talk, but it started happening more often, and I couldn't ignore it. These questions weren't just casual observations, they felt like they were meant to probe me, to test my reactions. Alex would always ask these things as though they were part of a broader conversation, but they were too specific, too pointed, for me to just brush them off. What was he really getting at? It wasn't just curiosity. It was like he was trying to learn something, to understand something about me that he could use to his advantage. I'm not naive. I've spent my life in business, making careful decisions, watching people's behavior. I know how to spot when someone is trying to manipulate a situation. And right now, Alex's actions were starting to feel more like manipulation than innocent conversation. It was subtle, but I could see the signs. He never directly asked for anything. No, Alex wasn't so blatant. He knew how to be charming, how to make you think he was harmless. But it was the little things, the way he would always bring up future decisions when we were alone, or the way he'd ask about the family legacy as if he already knew he was part of it. The more I thought about it, the more I began to suspect that Alex wasn't just asking about my estate out of interest. He wasn't just curious about the family business. There was an agenda behind his questions, one I wasn't sure I fully understood yet, but I had a feeling it wasn't going to be good for Emily or me. What worried me even more was that he never seemed to want to talk when other family members were around. It was always just me and him, alone in a corner of the room, in a hallway, or outside for a moment. I started wondering if maybe he was trying to get a read on me when no one else was watching to see if I would let something slip. One evening, after another round of these veiled questions, I decided I needed to confront him, but not directly. Not yet. I didn't want to make any hasty moves until I was sure. So instead, I began paying even closer attention, waiting for more signs that my suspicions were grounded in reality. At a family dinner a week later, the opportunity came. We were all gathered around the table, Peter, his wife, Alex, and a few other relatives. The conversation was light, the usual family banter. But Alex kept glancing at me between conversations, as though he was waiting for the right moment. Finally, when everyone else had moved on to dessert, he leaned over and casually asked, "Have you thought about what happens after you're gone, Robert?" The question seemed harmless, but it made my heart race. There it was again, another mention of future decisions. He was trying to get me talking, trying to figure out where I stood. I kept my voice even, trying not to show how uncomfortable I was. "I haven't really thought about it much, Alex. I've got enough on my plate right now." But that didn't stop him. He pressed on, his voice lower now, as if trying to be more personal. "You know, a lot of people don't realize how much planning goes into it. Estate planning, business succession, those are important decisions." I wasn't sure what to make of it. It was like he was trying to plant a seed, trying to nudge me into talking about my will, my assets, my future plans. I didn't want to give him anything, so I gave him nothing in return, simply nodding in agreement. But his eyes told a different story. There was a sharpness there, a calculating look that made my skin crawl. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just a random conversation. Alex wasn't just a curious nephew trying to understand how things worked. No, this felt like something more, like he was trying to figure out where I stood on the issue of inheritance. And if I was being honest, I started to suspect that he had already made up his mind about something. I didn't know exactly what Alex wanted. Was he trying to manipulate me into giving him a bigger share of my estate? Or was there something more devious at play? Either way, I knew I couldn't let my guard down. I had to figure out what he was after before it was too late. As I walked away from the dinner that night, I felt a pit in my stomach. I knew something was coming. I just wasn't sure when or how it would all unfold. But I wasn't going to let Alex take me by surprise. Not this time. I spent a restless night after that dinner, lying awake, turning over everything in my mind. The more I thought about Alex's behavior, the more uneasy I became. There was something off about the way he was speaking to me, the subtle hints, the questions about the future. It didn't sit right. I had to know more. But I didn't want to jump to conclusions without some real evidence. The next day, I decided to confide in Emily. She's my only daughter, and while she's been living abroad for years, we still keep in touch regularly. I trust her. She's level-headed, practical, everything I wasn't at her age. I hoped that talking to her would help me make sense of everything. I called her up, and after a few minutes of casual conversation, I decided to bring it up. "Emily, I need to talk to you about something. It's about Alex." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Emily, being the direct person she is, immediately sensed that something was wrong. "What about him?" I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I've been noticing some things lately. Little things, but they don't sit right with me. Alex, he's been asking about my estate, my plans for the future. And not in a casual way, he's been asking questions that feel a bit too pointed." I could almost hear Emily roll her eyes. She's always been the optimist in the family, always seeing the good in people. "Dad, I'm sure you're overthinking it. Alex is young and I think he's just curious. You know how he is, always asking questions, but never really thinking too much about the answers." Her words stung a little. I wasn't imagining things, I knew that. But Emily seemed so sure that Alex was harmless. I couldn't understand why she couldn't see what I was starting to see. But I didn't want to argue, so I just nodded. "Maybe you're right. But I can't shake the feeling that there's more to it." "Don't worry about it, Dad," she said, trying to reassure me. "I'm sure it's nothing. Alex isn't a threat. He's just naive, that's all." Naive. Maybe. But I wasn't convinced. Not yet. That conversation with Emily didn't help as much as I hoped it would. It didn't clear the cloud of suspicion hanging over me. If anything, it only made me more determined to dig deeper. So I decided to do what I've always done when something doesn't sit right with me. I started asking around. I didn't go around directly accusing Alex of anything. I wasn't sure enough for that. But I began to subtly ask people in the family, Peter, some old family friends, anyone I could talk to without raising suspicions. I made sure it seemed like casual conversation, nothing too pointed, just small talk about life, the family, and anything else that would seem harmless. It didn't take long for things to start adding up. Peter, of course, was the first person I turned to. He and I don't always see eye to eye, but he's my brother, and I've known him long enough to understand his weaknesses. I figured if anyone would have insight into Alex's behavior, it would be Peter. We had a quiet conversation over drinks one afternoon. I kept it light at first, talked about the old days, asked about Peter's latest business venture which, as always, was struggling. Then, almost casually, I brought up Alex. "How's Alex doing, by the way? He's been keeping to himself lately, hasn't he?" Peter nodded, scratching his chin. "Yeah, he's been a bit quiet. Always has been, though. You know how he is, keeps to himself, doesn't really share what's on his mind." I watched him closely, trying to get a read on him. He's been asking a lot of questions about the family business, about my property, investments, things like that. Have you noticed anything? Peter shrugged, not picking up on the hint in my voice. Alex? Nah, he's just a bit of a dreamer. Always asking about this or that, trying to figure out what's next for him. He's got his own plans, I think. Doesn't hurt to be curious, right? I didn't push him further. I wasn't sure if Peter knew anything, or if he was just too wrapped up in his own issues to notice what was going on. But I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Alex was up to something. Later that week, I ran into an old family friend at a local cafe. Tom had been a longtime associate of mine, and we'd known each other for years. He was retired now, but still kept in touch. He'd always been a good listener, and I knew I could trust him. We chatted for a while about the usual things: family, life, the town. Then, almost offhand, Tom mentioned something that made my stomach drop. I overheard Alex talking to some people recently. He was asking about the value of your property, your investments, stuff like that. He wasn't exactly subtle about it either. Made it sound like he had big plans for the future, like he was already making moves. I froze. Tom didn't know how much that little tidbit meant to me. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. This was something bigger. Alex wasn't just interested in the family business. He was actively trying to figure out how he could take control. He had been telling people he was the heir to my fortune. It was all starting to come together. Alex had been subtly asking the right questions, dropping hints, trying to make it clear that he was the one who should inherit everything. And from what I could tell, he was telling people about it, talking about his future plans as if it was already decided. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. My worst suspicions were proving to be true. Alex wasn't just looking for a place at the table, he was looking to take the whole table. And it wasn't going to be easy to stop him. But I had to try. I couldn't let him manipulate me, or Emily, into giving up what we'd worked for. I knew now that I had to act quickly. The truth was out there, and I needed to face it head on. I don't know what I expected when I decided to confront Alex. A part of me thought maybe it was all just a misunderstanding. Maybe I was reading too much into his behavior, imagining things that weren't there. But deep down, I knew I wasn't wrong. The way things had been building up, the little comments, the offhand questions, it all pointed to the same conclusion. Alex had plans for something that didn't sit well with me. So I called him, told him to meet me in my office, just the two of us. I wanted to handle this face to face. It was time to get to the bottom of it. The day of the meeting, I was nervous. I tried to shake it off. But there was an unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach. Was I about to lose all sense of normalcy in my family? Was I about to see a side of Alex I never thought possible? I didn't know. But I couldn't avoid it anymore. When Alex walked into my office, he seemed as cool as ever, a slight smile on his face, his usual confidence oozing from every step. He was dressed casually, nothing flashy, but you could tell he liked the idea of himself, his place in the world. "Hey, Uncle Robert," he said, taking a seat without waiting for me to invite him. His usual ease irritated me, but I kept it together. This wasn't about my irritation. It was about finding out the truth. "Alex, I need to talk to you about something," I began, keeping my voice steady. "I've overheard some things, and I need to know what's really going on." I watched him closely as I spoke, looking for any sign that he was nervous or guilty. But he just sat there, his face a mask of casual curiosity. "What things?" he asked, his tone light, but I could hear the subtle edge to it. I leaned forward, trying to keep my voice calm, but I couldn't stop the frustration that bubbled up. "Are you planning something, Alex? Because the way you've been acting. I'm not blind. I've been hearing things about the family business, about my estate. It's enough that I need to hear it from you, straight up. What's going on?" He chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair like I was making some kind of joke. "What are you talking about, Uncle? I'm just asking questions, making conversation. You know how I am, curious, always interested in the family business." I didn't buy it, not for a second. He was playing dumb, trying to deflect. But I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I kept pressing, my patience running thin. "Alex, I'm not an idiot. I know you've been talking to people, asking about my investments, the value of property, my future plans. This isn't just curiosity." The smile dropped from his face, and I saw a flicker of something else, something darker. It wasn't panic, but it was close. He sat up straighter, and for a brief moment I thought he might deny everything. But then, just as I was about to say something else, he spoke. "Fine," he said, his voice low. "You want the truth? I've been asking about your estate. I've been talking about the future, your legacy. Because I deserve it, Uncle. I've been here, I've worked hard. I understand the business, far more than Emily ever will. She's not even interested in any of it." He leaned forward, his eyes sharp, almost challenging me. "I'm the one who gets it, and I'm the one who gets it, and I'm the one who will keep the family legacy alive." I froze. For a split second, I couldn't process what I was hearing. This wasn't just a nephew seeking advice, or a young man trying to learn. No, Alex was making a claim that he somehow had more right to my wealth, my business, than Emily did. And worse, he seemed to believe it. I felt a rush of anger flood my chest, but I fought to control it. I had to keep my composure. I wasn't going to let him see how deeply his words hurt me. "You think you deserve it more than Emily?" I asked, my voice tight, disbelief creeping in. "You think you understand the business better than she does? You've barely even been involved. Emily has worked just as hard as you, if not harder, building her own life. And you think you deserve everything just because you think you're the better choice?" Alex scoffed, crossing his arms. "You don't get it, Uncle. She doesn't care about any of this. She's not here, not involved. She's always been too focused on her own thing, living her life somewhere else. She doesn't even know what it takes to keep this family going, to keep the business running." He shook his head, his tone growing more defensive. "I'm the one who gets it. I'm the one who's here, who's been here. And I'm the one who's willing to fight for it. I could see the arrogance in his eyes, the same arrogance that had been simmering just beneath the surface all this time. I didn't know when it started, but Alex had clearly decided that the family's wealth and legacy should be his, and his alone. And as for Emily, she was just an afterthought, a side note in his plans. The anger flared again, and I almost yelled, but I stopped myself. This wasn't about making noise. This was about taking control of my own life, my own decisions. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but I couldn't ignore the betrayal I felt. I need time to think about this, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. I'll be making decisions soon, but don't think for a second that this is a done deal. This is my life, Alex, not yours. He didn't look surprised. In fact, he almost seemed relieved. He got up from his chair, his face still cold. Take all the time you need, Uncle. I'll be here when you're ready to see things for what they really are. With that, he turned and left, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat there for a long time, the weight of everything settling heavily on my shoulders. I felt betrayed, not just by Alex, but by the way he had manipulated me, and by the way he'd so easily dismissed Emily. I knew things couldn't go back to normal after this. The family I thought I knew had changed, and I wasn't sure where that left me, or where it left Emily. But one thing was clear, Alex had crossed a line, and I was done letting him walk all over me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. After the confrontation, things between Alex and me were never the same. I couldn't bring myself to act like nothing had happened. I couldn't just go back to the way we used to be, sharing family meals and casual conversations. No, everything had changed in that moment. I distanced myself from him as much as possible, even at family gatherings. Whenever Alex was around, I found an excuse to leave early or to go into a separate room. I kept my interactions with him short, cold, and polite. I didn't trust him anymore, and I didn't know how to act like I did. It wasn't just Alex who felt the shift, though. Emily, who had been away for a while, noticed something was off when she came back to town for a visit. She's perceptive, more than I sometimes give her credit for, and it didn't take long for her to catch on to the tension. One evening, we were having dinner at my place, just the two of us. Emily had asked me about 100 little questions about my work, the usual things, but she could tell there was something weighing on me. Finally, she put down her fork and looked me straight in the eye. "Dad, what's going on with you?" she asked. "You're acting weird, and I don't know how to explain it, but something's different." What happened? I could feel my heart rate pick up. I'd been trying to keep this all under wraps, not wanting to drag Emily into this mess. But at the same time, I knew she deserved to know the truth. She was my daughter, and if things were about to change, she had every right to understand why. I hesitated. How do you explain something like this to your daughter? How do you explain that your nephew has been plotting behind your back, thinking he deserves your wealth more than your own child? I didn't want to burden her with this, but it wasn't something I could keep in anymore. I had a talk with Alex, and it didn't go well. Emily's eyebrows furrowed. "What do you mean? What happened?" I took a deep breath. I tried to keep it simple. I confronted him about some things I overheard. Turns out he's been thinking he should inherit my business, my estate. He told me he deserved it more than you because he understands the business better. I paused, looking for her reaction, but I could barely meet her eyes. I was shocked. I never imagined he'd feel that way. Emily stared at me, blinking in disbelief. "Wait, hold on. Are you saying Alex, your nephew, is trying to manipulate you into changing your will? Into leaving everything to him?" I nodded, feeling the weight of her words as they sank in. "Yes, he's been talking about keeping the family legacy alive, and he said you wouldn't appreciate it the way he would. It's messed up, Emily." She shook her head, a mix of confusion and anger on her face. "I can't believe it. I really can't. But why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you tell Uncle Peter? He needs to know what Alex is doing." I looked away, feeling the frustration bubble up again. "I don't think Peter would care, Emily. He's always been like that. He won't take this seriously, and if I tell him, it'll just make everything worse. I can't put you and your future at risk like that. Not over Alex's schemes." Emily's face softened. She stood up and walked over to me, her hands resting gently on my shoulder. "Dad, I know you want to protect me, but you're letting him get away with this. I'm not a kid anymore. If he's trying to pull something like this, we need to confront it head on. You can't just back down. You're stronger than that." I could feel her frustration too, but I wasn't sure she understood the full scope of it. I didn't want to drag the family through this. I didn't want to bring everything out into the open and start a war over money. But Emily was right. Keeping quiet wasn't going to fix anything. In fact, it was just going to make things worse. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't let Alex think he could walk all over me. "I'll think about it," I said quietly. "But I don't know what I'd say to Peter. And I don't want to tear the family apart, Emily." Her eyes softened. "I get it. But you have to make a choice, Dad. If Alex is making moves like this, you can't just ignore it. He'll keep pushing, and I'll end up with nothing." The words hit me harder than I expected. I knew she was right. If I didn't take control of this situation now, it would spiral further out of my hands. But at the same time, I was terrified of making things worse. I'd spent my whole life building this family, this business. I didn't want it to all fall apart because of Alex's greed. I spent the next few days turning everything over in my head. What was I supposed to do now? Confronting Alex had already shown me who he really was, but confronting Peter, my own brother, could shatter what little was left of our relationship. And I couldn't even begin to imagine how this would affect the rest of the family. Would they take Alex's side? Would they see me as just another old man clinging to his power? At the same time, I couldn't ignore what Alex had said, what he'd tried to do. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had to take action. I wasn't going to let my family's future be decided by someone who didn't respect it. I had to reconsider my will. I couldn't leave everything to Alex, not after this. But I didn't know how to proceed without causing irreparable damage. The weight of my decision was heavier than ever, and all the while Alex remained distant, still polite, still acting like nothing had happened. But I knew now, nothing would ever be the same. I had to decide what was truly worth fighting for, and who I could trust to be part of my legacy. The fallout had only just begun. I thought things couldn't get worse after my confrontation with Alex. I thought the distance I'd put between us and the boundaries I'd started to set would send a clear message. I wasn't going to be manipulated. But I was wrong. It wasn't just that Alex hadn't backed off, it was that he had taken things to a whole new level, and I wasn't prepared for what I was about to find out. It started with a casual phone call from an old friend of mine, Tom. Tom and I had known each other for years, and while we didn't talk often, when we did, it was always friendly and straightforward. But this time, Tom's tone was different, hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he should be saying what he was about to say. "Robert," he began, "I wasn't sure if I should bring this up, but I've been hearing some things about you." My heart sank. "About me? What kind of things?" Well, Tom hesitated. "It's Alex. He's been talking to people, mutual acquaintances, folks in the community, and he's been saying that you might not be well, in the best state of mind anymore, that you're having trouble managing things." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He said, "What?" "He's been implying that you're not as sharp as you used to be, that maybe you're not capable of making good decisions about your business or your estate. He even suggested you might need someone to step in and help manage things." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Alex wasn't just trying to manipulate me into changing my will, he was actively trying to undermine my reputation. He was planting seeds of doubt about my mental state, making people think I wasn't capable of handling my own affairs. And the worst part, he was doing it behind my back, while still smiling and acting polite to my face. I hung up the phone with Tom, my hands shaking with anger. This was more than just greed. This was betrayal on a level I hadn't thought possible. Alex wasn't just trying to get his hands on my money, he was trying to make me look incompetent, like I couldn't be trusted with my own life. And for what? To make himself look like the logical choice to take over. To justify his claims that he deserved everything more than Emily? I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let him destroy my reputation and manipulate the people around me. But the question was, what could I do? How do you fight back against someone who's willing to stoop so low, who's willing to play these kinds of games? I decided to confront Peter first. If anyone could talk sense into Alex, or at least get him to stop, it would be his father. I called Peter and asked him to meet me for coffee. He agreed, and the next day we sat across from each other in a quiet cafe. I could tell he wasn't expecting the conversation we were about to have. "Peter," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "we need to talk about Alex." Peter frowned. "What about him? What's going on?" I told him everything. About the confrontation in my office, about the things Alex had been saying to people, about how he was trying to make it seem like I couldn't be trusted. I laid it all out, hoping Peter would understand the seriousness of the situation. But instead of the concern or outrage I was expecting, Peter just shook his head and sighed. "Come on, Robert. Alex isn't perfect, but he's not out to get you. You're being paranoid. He's a good kid, ambitious, sure, but he wouldn't do something like that." I stared at him, stunned. "Peter, he's been telling people I'm senile, that I can't manage my own affairs. How is that not serious to you?" Peter waved a hand dismissively. "He's just trying to figure out his place in the family. He's young. He doesn't know how to approach these things the right way, but he's not trying to hurt you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Peter was defending him, brushing off everything Alex had done as if it were nothing. I realized then that I couldn't rely on Peter to handle this. He was too blind to Alex's faults, too wrapped up in his own view of his son to see the damage he was causing. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Alex, or anyone else, control my future. If he wanted to play games, fine. But I wasn't going to sit back and let him manipulate me or ruin my reputation. I was done giving him the benefit of the doubt. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I told him everything about Alex's behavior, his attempts to manipulate me, the lies he'd been spreading. And I told him I wanted to make changes to my will. Big changes. "Cut him out," I said firmly. "Completely. I don't want him to have any control over anything." My lawyer nodded, taking notes. "Understood. I'll make the necessary changes. Are you sure you don't want to discuss this with your family first?" "No," I said, my voice cold. "This is my decision, and I'm not going to let Alex manipulate me any longer." Over the next few days, the paperwork was finalized. My will was updated, and Alex's name was removed entirely. It was a drastic step, but it was the only way I could protect my family and my legacy from his schemes. I didn't care if it caused tension or backlash. I wasn't going to let him win. But as I sat in my office staring at the signed documents, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss. Alex wasn't just my nephew. He was family. And now, that bond was broken. I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. All I knew was that I had done what I had to do to protect myself and Emily. And for now, that would have to be enough. The changes to my will were finalized. The ink had dried, the decisions made, and the papers were locked away in my lawyer's office. I should have felt relief. After all, I'd taken the necessary steps to protect my legacy and ensure that Alex couldn't manipulate me or my family any longer. But instead of relief, there was a heaviness in my chest that I couldn't shake. Word spread quickly. It wasn't long before Peter found out about the changes I'd made. I knew the confrontation was coming. It was inevitable. He wasn't the kind of person to let something like this go unnoticed. And sure enough, he showed up at my house one evening, unannounced and visibly upset. "Robert, what the hell is going on?" He demanded the moment I opened the door. I sighed, stepping aside to let him in. I assume you're here about Alex. Peter stormed past me into the living room, his voice already raised. Of course I'm here about Alex. I just found out you've cut him out of your will entirely. Do you know how humiliating that is for him? For me? I stayed calm, even though my frustration was bubbling under the surface. Peter, I didn't make this decision lightly. Alex's behavior left me no choice. No choice? Peter scoffed, throwing his hands in the air. He's your nephew. My son. You're treating him like some kind of criminal. I felt my patience wearing thin. Peter, do you even know what he's been doing? He's been telling people I'm senile, that I can't manage my own affairs. He's been trying to undermine me, manipulate me, all to get what he wants. That's not just ambition, Peter, that's betrayal. Peter shook his head, refusing to believe me. Alex wouldn't do that. You've got it all wrong. He's just a kid trying to find his way. He doesn't mean any harm. Doesn't mean any harm, I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Peter, wake up. Your son has been plotting behind my back, trying to turn people against me. He doesn't care about this family, he only cares about himself. The room fell silent for a moment. Peter stared at me, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. Finally, he shook his head again, this time more slowly. You're paranoid, Robert. You've always been paranoid. And now you're punishing Alex because of your own insecurities. He turned and walked toward the door, pausing only to throw one final comment over his shoulder. You've destroyed this family. I hope you're happy. The door slammed behind him, and just like that, my relationship with my brother was shattered. The fallout didn't end there. Family gatherings became tense and awkward. Alex avoided me completely, but his presence was still a shadow hanging over every conversation. Peter's anger was palpable, even when he didn't say anything, and the rest of the family didn't know what to believe. Some sided with Peter, others stayed neutral, but no one seemed willing to address the elephant in the room. The only person who stood by me through it all was Emily. She was my anchor, my reminder that I'd made the right decision. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, she reached over and placed her hand on mine. You did what you had to do, Dad, she said softly. Don't let Peter or anyone else make you feel guilty about it. I nodded, though the guilt was still there, sitting like a weight on my chest. I didn't want it to come to this. I didn't want to lose Peter, or Alex for that matter. Emily gave me a sad smile. I know. But sometimes people show you who they really are, and you have to believe them. Alex made his choices, and so did Peter by refusing to see the truth. Her words were comforting, but they didn't erase the pain. I felt a deep sense of loss, not just because of what Alex had done, but because of what it meant for our family. I'd always believed we were stronger than this, that we could weather any storm. But now, it was clear that the bonds I thought were unbreakable had been fraying for years, and Alex's actions had simply torn them apart. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. I thought about Alex's ambition, Peter's denial, and the way it had all spiraled out of control. But more than anything, I thought about the emotional toll it had taken on me. It wasn't just about the money or the estate. It was about trust that had been broken in a way I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. I'd always tried to do right by my family, to be fair and supportive. But Alex's actions had shown me that fairness isn't always enough. Sometimes, people take advantage of your kindness, and you have to stand your ground. As painful as it was, I also realized that this experience had brought Emily and me closer together. She'd always been independent, living her own life far away, but through all of this, she'd been my rock. I started making an effort to spend more time with her, to strengthen our relationship in a way I hadn't done before. I couldn't change the past, and I couldn't undo the damage that had been done to my family, but I could move forward. I could focus on the relationships that mattered, on the people who truly cared about me. In the end, I found a sense of peace. It wasn't the peace I'd imagined for myself. It was quieter, more fragile, but it was peace nonetheless. I'd made my decisions, and I stood by them. And as much as it hurt to lose Peter and Alex, I knew I'd done what was right for me, for Emily, and for the legacy I wanted to leave behind. Life doesn't always turn out the way you expect. Families aren't perfect, and people aren't always who you think they are. But in the midst of all the chaos, there's one thing I've learned. The only way forward is to hold on to the people who truly matter and let go of the ones who don't.